All right, let's take you live now to Zimbabwe for the latest in terms of what's happening there. I do have Peter Ndoro joining me all the way in Harare. Peter, a very good afternoon to you. Of course, it's just a couple of hours now before the Zimbabweans go to the polls. We've been monitoring all the border posts. We've been monitoring all the action and, of course, the excitement all across the globe as, of course, Zimbabwe goes to the polls tomorrow. What do you have for us at this time?
Alicia, thanks very much indeed. Well, the sun is starting to set here, and so in this part of the world we say Maneru Akanaka, which is basically saying good evening. Yeah, when the sun sets, people will be going to sleep for the last time, and they'll wake up tomorrow morning and vote in historic polls that President Robert Mugabe earlier on today, breaking his silence, was saying he hopes that these elections people will say no, no, no to unconstitutional. Well, to make sure that these polls are free and fair, there's a whole host of election observers that have come from many countries in the world, Europe, the US, but also Africa is very well represented. And one of the organizations itself is the African Union. And now we meet the head of the AU Election Observation Mission, Haile Mariam Desalegn, who you might remember is a former Prime Minister of Ethiopia. Thank you very much for joining us on the program, and welcome to you. You've been here a while now, but this is the third phase of the election observation process.
Yes, thank you, SABC. I think we are here representing our continent through the African Union. And the African Union Election Observation Mission has a mandate to see the fair, credible and transparent election takes place in Zimbabwe as a member state of the African Union. So I think our mission is the most with SADC as part of the African continent, and COMESA as well. So we represent the continent at large.
All right, so what have you been able to see so far? Perhaps you can give us an update of your observations, how you're feeling. So far, so good?
I think we have two stickyards to measure. One is compared with the last elections that has taken place in Zimbabwe, and also with the standard set by the African Union through the guidelines to observe the African elections. And I think compared with the previous elections in Zimbabwe, this one has been generally very peaceful. A few incidents here and there, but that can happen at this moment in the country's history. I think this is a very remarkable change. And the organization of the election through the Zimbabwean Election Commission, which they call ZEC, is fairly in good shape, but there are a number of allegations and complaints by the opposition party members, where ZEC is responding as per the legal procedures and the laws and the frameworks that have been enshrined by the parliament. But in any case, we believe that there are room for looking into this issue, but the election, the ballot voting will be conducted tomorrow, and we hope that also will be concluded peacefully.
All right, so Zimbabwean citizens are probably watching this interview and they said, but hang on, the African Union has been to all of our other elections and we suggest to Mr. Desalegn that those elections were stolen, and yet the African Union ticked them off as being credible. How can the Zimbabwean population trust that you will make sure that the voting process is free and fair?
I think that mistrust is there. We also believe that the election observation and methodologies that set forth in the earlier times has been reviewed, and we have taken transformative ways. This time, we always come as a short-term observers, and we decide on our short-term views, which we have seen during the election period that has shortcomings. So now we have made it to have 4 fronts. The first one is pre-election mission, which has concluded it is looking into whether election can be conducted in Zimbabwe or not. The second one is high-level commission, which is led by the chairperson of the commission and along with political affairs commission. They visited Zimbabwe. And the result of that visit was supporting and giving capacity building and technical support to the Zimbabwean Electoral Commission. That has successfully been made, and they also acknowledge that this has supported them in organizing to administer this election. Again, we sent long-term observers, which usually we never have done this kind of mission. And I think they stayed for more than a month now, so that their findings also helps us to come up. And again, as a short-term observers, we'll continue to observe, the dates coming to the ballot day, and we'll stay up to 4th, 5th until the election result is announced, and we'll see and observe and put our recommendations accordingly. Beyond that, we'll also continue to stay one mission to stay until some time, so that we get some information necessary again to improve in the future the election process. Frankly speaking, this is a landmark period for Zimbabweans to have a democratic election, and we don't expect that there will be a perfect election to be conducted within this short period of time. But in any case, we feel that it is now very peaceful, and that has to continue. For Zimbabweans, or for all political parties, and for civil society organizations in Zimbabwe, conducting this election in a peaceful manner, and if there is any allegation or discontent, and if there is any grievances, should be addressed according to the legal procedures set forth by the parliament and international standard. And I urge and call upon all stakeholders that this election should be very peaceful up to the end, which helps all the Zimbabwean people.
All right, so are you saying that you would be brave enough to say, if this election falls short of a minimum standard required, that the African Union will say, Zimbabwe, it wasn't good enough, we're not going to endorse it?
By the way, an election is one of the manifestation of democratic processes in African countries, and democracy in Africa is now becoming an existential issue. It's not just choosing amongst the best governance systems. So if it is an existential issue for countries, then we should be there to say objectively, with independence and neutrality, and also constructively. We shouldn't damage the whole thing, but in a constructive manner. We have to be neutral, independent, and objective in reporting our findings.
All right. So far, once again, from the things that you've seen, the opposition have said a few things that they're worried about. Are they substantial enough to alter the outcome, should they be deemed to be true?
As the polling day is tomorrow, we cannot say anything at this time, because the decision is the decision of the people of Zimbabwe. So we'll see how the people decides. But the process so far is now leading to the polling day, and everyone is going to the polling day. We were a little concerned when one of the parties was saying that they will boycott this election, but ultimately they clarified that they are not boycotting. They will go for this election. They will see the decision of the people. So I think it is ultimately the people of Zimbabwe deciding who will win this election. So we'll see tomorrow how the vote goes.
There's been claims by the opposition that too many ballot papers have been printed. They're saying that 7 million, and that's way beyond the excess they're allowed. Is that something that's come to your attention, and have you engaged the ZEC to find out the veracity of that?
I think we have engaged ZEC after getting the allegations. and ZEC has confirmed that it's only 10% of the ballot box beyond the number which is registered for voting. So we take that. If there is any anomalies, then with evidence, we'll see if there is any.
All right, and then access to the voters' roll, which I guess is a pretty key thing for the opposition to get their hands on. Has that been resolved to your satisfaction?
By the way, the findings we got is that the registration process and the registration roll has been very much improved, as everyone witnessed so far. But as any case, there are some allegations that's going on in this regard, and we are looking also into it.
All right, so they're not yet been resolved?
Yeah, it's not. I mean, still the contestation continued and the allegations continued, but ZEC has explained to us that they have done this according to the legal procedures and framework. But we will see in our findings what to recommend.
All right, so tomorrow is a busy day. How big is your team and where will you be?
Well, I will be Harare and surroundings, but my team members are deployed all over Zimbabwe. We have 64 members in 23 groups. We will cover 2/3 of the districts in Zimbabwe, which is fairly good as a sample representatives. And I think we have selected areas of hotspot in such a way that it represents quite well as a sample.
All right, and that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you very, very much indeed for your insights, and we wish you the best of luck tomorrow.
Thank you so much. I wish all the Zimbabwean people a peaceful and stable and credible election.
All right, thank you very much, sir. All right, we were just speaking to Haile Mariam Desalegn, former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, but also the current head of the AU Election Observation Mission. And there you have it. I think they seem fairly well happy with the procedures so far. They've noted the concerns of the opposition parties, and some are still under investigation. But it does seem, from his initial responses, is that so far so good. And compared to the last elections, many leaps have been made by the current election process, and perhaps it'll deliver the results that the people want in Zimbabwe. That's where we're going to leave it for now. A little bit later on today, we're going to speak to a pollster, a group that have decided that one party is going to win by a landslide. Find out who that party is and how big the win they suggest is going to be. That's all coming up a little bit later on. From Harare for now, Chisarai.
Peter, if you can still hear me, do tell us. I mean, I hear you speaking to the election observers there.
Yes.
This is the one thing that we've been wanting to know for the rest of the day. Is there an election dispute resolution in place to deal with all the election allegations of vote rigging, of the ghost voters, and so forth?
Yes, I mean, they're fairly standard procedures, and I think they've always been there in Zimbabwe throughout the election process. And usually you start with the electoral commissions themselves, and they try to resolve those issues. But the parties themselves do have an opportunity to take their issues through the courts systems. The only problem in previous years, and this is where it has been tricky in the past, is that the courts were accused of having been captured by the state, and that a lot of the issues were never really fully resolved, and some of them, I can say, were not even ever heard. So one would have to have faith and belief in the court system to be able to adjudicate the queries that may be raised, but also to be able to do them quickly, because as you can imagine, these court systems, if you want to abuse them, these issues can drag on for years, and meanwhile you're in office. So I think, though, that the current president has really gone out of his way to try and create an environment where he says we want as many observers to come and see, we want it as transparent as possible, and we want it to be as free and fair as possible, because if it is not perceived that way by the international community, there will be a challenge to try and entice foreign direct investment to sort of kickstart the economy again. all of this partly is very dependent on making sure that there's a credible vote that takes place. So there's a lot to risk if they don't do it properly.
And Peter, look, talk to us about this. I had some analysts from Zimbabwe here in studio early this morning, and they feel that there's this sentiment that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission is actually, it shares common interests, or it's aiding the ZANU-PF in their endeavors when it comes to elections and so forth. What do you think about this notion? Because then it makes it very difficult to go and dispute anything that has been done in terms of the electoral processes.
Look, in the end, the proof is going to be in the pudding. Because of the history and the nature of the relationship between the ZEC and the government in the past, for sure, people will find it very difficult to trust immediately anything that happens. And if they don't deal with them quickly and to their satisfaction, the opposition parties will always cry foul. So I suppose in the end, all that one can do is to allow the process to play out. And if there are issues and discrepancies, then one can investigate the integrity of how the ZEC deals with them, and also the court system a little bit further down the line. I think a lot of people are saying, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Yes, historically, we've had this relationship that perhaps wasn't as ethical as it should have been. And I had this conversation with the Assistant Senior Commissioner of Police, who they've had a terrible relationship with the citizens, but they're saying, listen, with the coming in of President Mnangagwa, things have changed. And as I said, there's so much at risk if they don't get these elections right, so that it won't matter if you win, if you cheated, because the investment that's required to fix this economy just won't happen. So, one wonders is if they would risk that. But again, we just have to wait and see. The proof is in the pudding. The process will happen, and if there are shortfalls, the opposition or whoever the losing party might be will raise them, and they will be tested.
All right. And Peter, just before I let you go, you are currently in the ZANU-PF stronghold there, and we saw that announcement from former President Robert Mugabe earlier on, literally saying he's going to go and vote for the opposition. Now, you've had enough time to gauge, the reaction after those utterances. What are the people saying in regards to this? Because we do understand Mugabe actually still enjoys quite a lot of support within the ZANU-PF, and figures of around 500,000 members supporting him still were thrown around.
All right, so Harare is very much an opposition stronghold, and it has been for many, many years and many elections. So ZANU-PF haven't traditionally expected much from the urban centres. And to be honest with you, I don't think a lot of people were shocked by some of the things that President Robert Mugabe said today. I mean, he was typical Robert Mugabe, speaking his mind and using the sort of sophisticated language that we've grown to know over the years. And so to say I can't vote for my tormentors was not a shock. It was not a surprise. I think that was a given almost, because remember, he fired Emerson Mnangagwa from his cabinet as vice president. So there's no love lost between the two. And I think perhaps what was telling as well was he started to question just how far back his distrust should have been, taking us back to pre-independence days. And so there'll be questions that he's been asking himself over time. Should I have seen this? Should I have been a bit more aware of this guy? But he's probably grappling with trying to figure out why in November, after 38 years, he found himself without a job and at the hands of people he thought he could trust. So in Harare, are people shocked? Are they surprised? Probably not.
Peter Ndoro, let's leave it there. Thank you so much, your reporter there. That's Peter Ndoro, is live to us from Harare out in Zimbabwe. And of course, he was talking to the head of the international observers there that will be taking charge of the elections.